feeling too, this whole thing just feels heavier than I can handle, or whatever. Is it okay for me, instead of focusing on that, just feeling I don't want to focus at all, period. I'm afraid of focusing. Or I'm just too lonely. And when you check inside your body most of the time, oh yeah, that's a distance from that whole thing. Yeah, I could sit with just not even wanting to focus. I'm focused out. I'm tired of focusing. I don't want to get anywhere near it, or whatever it is, you see. So when you look at it in a different way, it's very exciting and hopeful, because that means that literally nothing can happen to you in your life that can block you from growing. How do I know if I'm focusing? Good idea. Sometimes people ask that question, how do I know if I'm focusing? Well, what's important is you're the only one who really ultimately can say whether you're focusing or not. So what you want to notice in yourself are things like this. If you're really focusing, you will notice over, I say, a period of time, but it may, and there should be a pattern there in particular, that as you move through the layers that Peter's talking about, that you notice inside that you're not just going back to square one over and over again inside, in the feel of it. That when somebody pushes your button again, or some situation happens, you can notice there isn't the same intensity of that response that you've been focusing on, whatever it may be. Oh, not quite as angry, not quite as something, not quite as whatever it is. See? That's how you notice that. I would never make an important life decision on the basis of one focusing experience. Let's say you're focusing on your unhappiness in a job. And so you focus. And the words come, get out. Go find a new job. My advice would be, and so would Jean's advice, Dr. Junlin's advice, focus on it a little bit more for a few more weeks, until you have confirmed a pattern inside that reaffirms that. It comes back and says, and it feels more and more solid inside that, yes, this is a decision that I should make. And it feels more and more right that as you carry that through the weeks, this decision gives you more and more strength and a kind of peace and less tension about the issue. So you're noticing in your body that the pattern is not only something that is primarily something that's changing the way you feel about it. And the way the confusion in your body is lessening. So you notice when you're focusing in on track by a process of discernment. This is what Ignatius talks about in the spiritual exercises all the time. The body's discernment is very, very important, because over a period of time, we really can't fool the body. Well, we can do it for a while, but the proof is in the pudding, because when you can play games with yourself and focusing and do all kinds of things and call it focusing. But first of all, if it doesn't feel physically better, at least a teeny bit, every time you go through peeling those layers off, and if the pattern itself doesn't feel like something is loosening and easing inside, and there's a direction coming that feels right, and I'm not lying awake now or worrying about it, or I'm not carrying the heaviness, or don't feel that tightness in my chest, or I can breathe more easily, or I don't feel the tension in my neck, or the headaches have diminished, or something like that, then if you don't have some body indication you're on track, well, whatever it is you're doing, it isn't focusing. because every felt shift that is in fact a real shift and not game playing, you always notice some kind of direction inside, a rightness, a connectedness, an easing that is some physiological, has a physiological dimension to it of stress release. And that's the way you tell whether you're focusing or not. I think that the structure is here to guide us, but that we should never bronze it. We need to adapt it, each one of us. If you understand what it is, and you have the feel for the process in yourself, then you'll have there's hope always. There's always hope, see, in my life, that nothing can happen to me that I can't grow through. That the very defenses themselves, whether they're just things that happen now or they're things that I carry from the past, do not have to be obstacles to my growth. That I can still be with that and a doorway can open. And that in itself is worth 6 days, discovering that, to say the least. Another thing that I discovered was that as I worked with people in focusing some years ago, began to do this regularly myself, I realized that it didn't seem to me there was enough emphasis in what Dr. Genlin had done and had developed at that time. That something needed to happen in the middle of this process, because very quickly people would bite off more than they could chew. Not only did we not have this step of asking for permission in there, which was a big help, and lots of people were able to continue focusing with what, and not have to go with something that they couldn't be with, or that their defenses came right in. But oftentimes they would go with something, and what would happen inside, as soon as they got into what is, I don't know what step it is on your little chart here, but letting yourself feel, no, it's D on there, can I let myself feel the whole thing, and so forth. Be in the way the whole thing feels in my body. As soon as they would get into that spot inside, letting go into it, those things would click right back into place. Those fears, those doors would come down, and they would just get stuck right in there. And I realized that something more had to be added to this whole thing, and that's where the caring presence that we've emphasized so much came in. I began to look at my own experience and say, was there a time when my body was really open? And I remember going back to an experience when I was 15 or 16, and my dad and I were working, and we were working developing the swimming facilities for this camp where I worked with the emotionally disturbed kids later on as a teenager. But it was hard work, and my dad had some other hired men there, and we were all doing that hard physical work, and at noontime I wanted to go swimming in another part of that that had been built. And so I would wanted to go down, put a rubber raft, and just get on it and lie there in the sun and in my bathing suit and just relax, get kind of a snooze, but let the waves and the sun and the water just relax me for an hour or so before we had to start back to work again. So I went down there and got on this rubber raft. There was a tiny breeze, and what would happen, I was lying on this thing, and it would blow me to the other end of the lake. And I thought, oh, I don't want that to happen, because if I'm not back there on time, my dad will really be angry. So I was lying on this rubber raft and going like this, kind of dog paddling, staying near the shore so that when the time came to go back to work, I'd get right in there and back. And I was doing that back and forth, and finally it just got so tiring I said, oh, the heck with it. If I blow to the other end of the lake, I blow to the other end of the lake. I'm just going to be in the sunshine and be in the beauty of all of this. And when I said, oh, the heck with it, I'm just not going to fight it anymore, and just lay there and let the sound of the water and feel the sun on my body and all of that, the sound of the little waves that were there in that lake, get inside me. It was just an extraordinary experience, like the waves were in the sun and all of it was inside me, and there was no separation between me and outside like that. So I was in the seminary trying to work with these things and trying to figure out how do you just let go into something in a physical way, not always do it with the head. And I remembered that experience. So when I came to this section in working with this, I went back to that experience and some others that I'd had. And I realized that there was a way that our bodies could tell us how to loosen that armor and that way of always thinking and planning and regulating things with our minds, and that there was a teacher inside us that we could learn from. And I found out when I started to do that in Guide People in Focusing that their success rate went from maybe 15 or 20% to about 95% with that one change. That one change. Around not only creating caring, feeling presence as a body way of holding something that we go like that to, but introducing it into the process at, I think, the right spot, which is before they even get into it. It's just after they've done the selecting and checking and so forth. So I wanted to bring that out to you because I think that's very important.
The phrase that we sometimes use for this letting go phrase is letting go into it, just being in it, sensing the whole of it. And when we say that, what we're talking about is letting go into it. It is all of this. It's the feelings and emotions on the top, and then it's all of this underneath. And remember what we said, that the potential for change and for forward movement in your life, in your story, in your experiencing, it lies here, and that the feeling that's on the surface is part of that, but it's the doorway into that. So in focusing, what we're doing is we're allowing ourselves to be present to all about this relationship, all about this situation in my life. And there's certain feelings about that, emotions, maybe even physical sensations, but there's also the more of that. And in focusing, this is what becomes available. And when this is available, and you sit with this for a bit, and that's the point here, is that when you let go into it with a caring presence or with a presence that allows you to connect, and if you hold it like that, then pretty soon it's going to speak to you in some way with a symbol. And the symbol can be anything. It can be a word, it can be an image, it can be a memory, it can be a feeling or a body sensation, it can be tears, it can be a giggle, it can be anything. But it's something that comes, and as soon as it connects with that, something inside you says, yes, that's how it is. I remember once that I was in a very confusing situation in a situation with 2 or 3 people, and I just couldn't sort my feelings out. So what I did is I took time to focus, and I took the whole gloppy mess, and I just held it. And the first word that came was angry. That's how I feel, because it had been so, and I'm English, and you don't get angry. You just, so I mean, it just became clear, I'm really angry in this crazy situation. And when that word came, it felt right. But it also felt like it still had a little distance to go, like it was right, but it wasn't the whole thing. So the next question I ask myself with this word that's come that's right, but not all of it, is I just invite myself, okay, then is it okay for me now just to be with the feeling of all this angry? And so I held the angry for a while, and as I held it, then what happened is the word came, well, it's angry, but it's so confusing. And confusing really said it too. It's like you got an onion, and the first layer of the onion is angry, and you get that clear, and then you sit with angry, and the next layer of the onion is confusing, and you hold that and you sit with that. Well, then I sat with confusing, and as I sat with confusing, then it wasn't very long and the word came. What it really is in this situation is, with all this going on, I really feel helpless. Now boy, as soon as that came, I could just feel something inside me go. It just connected. That's what it was. That's how I felt in that situation. I felt totally helpless. And as soon as that came, it's like I knew that's it. And the strange thing is, you would think that when you feel helpless, you'd really feel, God, I feel awful. But you actually feel exhilarated to connect with how it really is inside you. That's the fascinating thing in focusing, is you really, when you connect with how you truly are inside, it's like, the sun comes up, and it's technicolor and not black and white. You see, and that's what's happening here, and that's a little bit of what this recycling piece is about that you have on that chart, is when you're doing your focusing and you're holding, it's okay to be with something, and then you let go into it and with caring presence and allow it to express itself, and maybe it expresses itself with a word, but it's a word that's kind of an on the way there word. It's not the whole picture. Then what you do is you do a recycling. In other words, when angry came, I went back and asked myself, is it okay to be with angry? And if that's yes, okay, then I let go into angry and hold angry until angry expresses itself as confusion. And then if that still feels like it needs to go further, then what I do is I recycle again. I go back. Is it okay to be with confusion? And then what comes is the helplessness, you see. So the recycling is just one step after another step after another step. That's what you're doing in the recycling.
Until it feels that it's said for now what it wants to say, or until you feel for some reason you want to stop.
Right. And this little box that you have in there called reflection, that's for the companion. That's for the person who's walking with the one who's focusing. And if I had been focusing with someone else, if I had said the word angry, then my companion would have let the word be there for a little bit to kind of respect the word and the feeling around it, and then he or she would have just said that word back to me, angry. And what that does is when you are arriving at something in yourself and you find your own words for it, and those words are the symbol that say how it is, just to hear someone else say your words back to you. It gives you the feel of being accompanied, but it's also like a bell echo that allows you to hold the resonance of that feeling in your body, because those are not just words that are cognitive words. Those are words that connect in a body way inside you. So when you hear the word given back to you, it allows you to feel the resonance again in your body and to hold it.
Or to feel that it's not quite on yet. And that's
Right.
as equally important.
Right.
Yes, that's what, you know, when we used to play warmer, colder. It's to even hearing it from somebody else. Oh no, not quite yet. So then, but enough to stay with it, or enough to reject it and stay back, waiting for something else to come. So being accompanied is those words are words that are felt inside and help you in the discernment process in a body way inside to know, yes, that's a step, or not quite yet, or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're important. So you don't want to change the person's words. You don't want to translate it. You don't look for a synonym. You don't add something to it that isn't a part of it. Is the briefer the better. But the person might say something that it all feels scary or something like that. And it's all right to say something like that. It all feels scary. Somebody brought up a question about sometimes you use the personal pronoun there. You know, I feel something, or you'd use I in there. And it's better if you are not that familiar with doing this very much as a companion for someone, to not use the word you feel angry in responding. It's better to just use the word anger, or it feels like it's angry inside, or whatever word, leaving the I out until you sense yourself that your own empathic presence to that person is so close that you're traveling really inside them. Then when you use the personal pronoun, you'll slip into it without even knowing it most of the time, and then it doesn't feel peculiar and awkward to the person who's doing the focusing. But anytime you're not really there, and many of us, you know, there are times when we're there and times when we're not there. If any of you are therapists or spiritual directors know that sort of thing. And I used to watch Carl Rogers when he was teaching me years ago. And it was just amazing to watch that happen in front of you. He starts out as a separate person, and it's not very long before there's really only just one person there, so to speak. Two bodies, one person. And the I that was coming out from him and from the other person was just like one eye. It was beautiful to watch it. But if it doesn't feel that that's where things are at, obviously don't use it. Yeah. About the nurturing step, then, the last one. I also found in my experience that people would end a focusing session, something would shift, they would check it, it would feel better, and then they would just open their eyes and start to talk. And that always bothered me, because I felt that we were missing something that was so important that we needed to, and they needed to, be with in order to continue to connect and have continuity in their focusing. So I devised this nurturing process with the 3 parts of it. And so what I would do, and I'll kind of go through it, is I would go through with someone that I was working with. I would ask them after they had said to me something to the fact that this is a place where I can pause, or I feel like I need to stop here now, or I'm tired, or something like that. And then I would say, well, let's take just a few moments to nurture that pause, that place where you've stopped inside. Let's take some time to just nurture that before we finish. And to start out that process of nurturing this place that you've come to inside, let's do a little before and after checking. So for a moment or so, go back in your memory to when we first started to focus. And see if you can remember how that place, that issue inside felt when you first started to focus. See if you can recall how that felt in your body, what the physical feel of that was. Maybe some of that's been brought out, and I'll even use their words. Let's just say it felt tight in the neck, and there was a kind of heaviness on the shoulders here. And I might say, remember, you mentioned how it was heavy on the shoulders, and there was a tightness there, and those things. Just give them a little chance to recreate that, bring that back again. And then I will say, now come to the way this whole issue feels in your body now. And notice How do I carry this inside myself right now? What's the body feel of it? How about the neck? Is that still tight that way? Are the shoulders still feel that heaviness? What do you notice inside? Does it feel just the same? I always give them those words so that if it hasn't really shifted, and sometimes it hasn't, they're just putting on a performance for me, or don't want to fail or something, that it's okay with me if it hasn't moved. And I let them know that they don't have to say that it's moved. So I said, does that just feel like it hasn't moved at all? It's just the same as it was, or does something eased in there?
And can I just say something right there? And if it hasn't moved, and they own that and acknowledge it, then just invite them for a moment. Would it be all right just to take a moment and be with how it feels in your body that it hasn't moved? And very often that will create a point of connecting. You know, how does it feel that it hasn't moved?
And usually to tell them to, if that's where it's at, I don't go any further with that process, and to let that place that hasn't moved know that I'll come back to it, so that they stay connected. But let's say that, as in most cases, something has shifted somewhere inside. So I ask them to really notice that difference, and very often people will say to me that aren't used to focusing or being guided by someone with some experience, they'll say, it feels better. And I don't let them off the hook with that kind of a phrase. I'll ask them, how does your body tell you that it feels better? It's telling your brain, and you're putting the word on it, better. See, I don't want that kind of wishy-washy language for them, because they need to notice inside. This is a discernment process that we're going through. They need to notice what their body language is, because that's what we don't pay attention to. We need to pay attention to that and notice it. Oh, they'll say, well, then, such and such, the stomach is eased, or those muscles feel more relaxed, or my chest feels more open. So I just keep working with them until I can pull that out of them, of how their body